Every time I look at my watch, it makes me happy. They're beautiful style, they're beautiful design, they're something I enjoy. I start the day with a watch, figuring out which watch I want to wear, and then the shirt, the suit, the tie, they come around the watch, because the watch excites me a lot more than any of those other fashion pieces. My name is Jeff Stein. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a lawyer by day, and at night I collect watches and operate a website called OnTheDash.com. All this started with an interest in vintage cars. I used to go to vintage car races, and I was in California at the Monterey Historic Races, and I saw a dashboard mounted Heuer stopwatch, and I just thought, that is the best looking thing I've ever seen. It arrived as promised, except that it was broken. The watch didn't run properly, it didn't reset. I sent it back to him, which was a leap of faith, because at that point he had my money and he had his watch, but he sent it back to me and it was perfect, and this is part of the permanent collection. From the dashboard timers, I moved into the chronographs, and you see where that has taken me. In terms of the sort of the look and the feel of what I like to collect, key traits are legibility. I like kind of rugged watches, so these all tend to be sport watches rather than dress watches. And most of them are vintage, a handful of modern but primarily vintage chronographs. With trading and moving in and out and buying and selling, I've really come to rest in the 1960s to early 70s Octavias. So this is another one from the 1970s, and you see it hardly looks like the same animal as the one from 1962 or 1963. But when you think about cars, it's a lot of the same thing. The style of the early 60s, the Corvairs and the first Mustangs looked very different than the bloated cars that we were seeing by the mid to late 70s and into the 80s. So my collecting theme has sort of moved more toward the 60s and 70s and more toward the Octavias. 15 years after getting started in this hobby, it has changed some over the years. I think one thing that's important for any collector is not just to have, a list of this is what I want or this is what I collect, but I think of my collection, which is primarily the vintage Heuers, as having within it sort of some sub-collections. One category of a sub-collection, if you will, are the Abercrombie and Fitch watches. Heuer made these for Abercrombie and Fitch in the 1940s and 1950s. These were the days when Abercrombie and Fitch wasn't a mall store for teenagers, but there were two stores, one in Chicago and one in New York. And this is where the proper people went to be outfitted if they were going on an expedition, if they were going on a vacation, if they were going motoring. So Abercrombie and Fitch was a destination store with the best quality of everything. And so every year, the president of Abercrombie would go meet with the president of Heuer and describe some interesting ideas for watches. And they wanted the best of the best, the strongest watches, the best watches, because they had a very upscale clientele. So one of the themes of my own collecting, and something that I think is very important for any collector, is to ask yourself, am I still happy with what I have? Part of my outlook on collecting is I wear everything I own. I don't have any safe queens or pristine, perfect, never worn watch. So if a watch is selling at a premium because it's new old stock, never being worn, that's going to be wasted on me, because the first thing I'm going to do is take it out of the box and wear it. I'm not a real project collector. I guess I just don't have the time and patience for it. So most of my watches are somewhere in that middle range. They're not projects, but they're not new old stock, but they're nice samples that I like to wear. Another sub-theme of my collection is the sort of racing connection, if you will. One of the things I really like about the brand Heuer is that these are the watches that were used in the 1960s before there were promotions, etc., etc. The watches that the real racers wanted to wear were the Heuers. Over the years, of course, the famous one is Steve McQueen wore a Heuer Monaco, and Mario Andretti wore several different Heuers. And this exact Octavia, this is the execution that my favorite Formula One driver, Gilles Villeneuve, wore. This is the watch that the German Formula One champion Jochen Rindt wore. And there are fantastic pictures of him wearing this version of the watch. This watch is interesting. It's got engraving on the back for Parnelli Jones, his racing team that won 2 championships in the early 70s. And so this was engraved and given out as the champions of 1970 and 71. One of the mottos that I've always followed in collecting is that condition only matters on the second one. The first watch you buy of a particular sample, let's take this Solunar. I was chasing these forever. Probably for 5 years I wanted a Solunar, and the price kept going up and moving away, and I was never successful in buying one. So the example would be that for the first one that I buy, condition is not really that important. But once I have one, then I might think of trying to upgrade it. On the first watch, it has to be something you like, it has to be something you would enjoy wearing. But for me, every watch doesn't have to be a 100-point watch. People collect watches with all different themes. To me, it's interesting to collect based on the uses of watches. Part of my collection consists of pilot's watches. This is a Heuer chronograph that was issued to the Italian Air Force. It's all banged up, which is great. You imagine a pilot wearing it in a thick uniform and banging it against other metal in the cockpit, and so that's fine for me. To my way of thinking, if this watch were in mint perfect, pristine, new old stock condition, that would make it less interesting to me. Another thing I like about collecting the watches that may matter for some people but not for others is the history. Probably the most interesting historical find that the Heuer community has had over the years has been this stopwatch. Once upon a time it was just a stopwatch and you could find it for about $100 in a given night. And then one night I was looking on a discussion forum and somebody had posted a picture of this identical same watch at a museum in San Diego with a little card at the bottom of the watch that said, this watch was worn by John Glenn in February 1962. So all of a sudden the wheels start turning and there's a big issue, a big discussion in the vintage watch community about the watches worn in space. So a couple of sleepless nights of going through NASA archives, and we had established that John Glenn in February 1962 wore this stopwatch in kind of an improvised strap arrangement so that this became the backup on his first orbital flight in space. This was something that Tag Heuer was very proud of because it turned out that they had the first Swiss watch in space, not any of the other brands. This one is a Heuer from about 1935. It was issued to the German Air Force. I got this one on a family vacation to Israel. I had been in touch with a collector there that had a lot of military issued watches, and I'd always been wanting one of these. So we arranged by email, and I met him at a gas station. Put the family to bed, told my wife, I'm going to such and so junction, I'm going to take the exit to the right, I'm going to go 400 meters and there's a gas station on the left, and that's where I'm meeting this guy. So if you never see me again, start the search there. So I met him at the gas station, fell in love with the watch, and I ended up buying it. So the rest of the trip I was going to the cash machine every few hours trying to figure out exactly what the limit was. So I actually met him maybe the second day of the trip and met him again the last day of the trip to give him the money and buy the watch. I wore these two watches at the weddings of my two daughters. Everybody wanted to know, what watch are you going to wear to your daughter's wedding? For the first wedding, my son-in-law-to-be decided he wanted a white Heuer Carrera. So I did the natural thing. I decided that the father of the bride, with a black tuxedo of course, should wear a black Carrera. So this was the watch for the first wedding in the family. And some people would say you should never wear a chronograph with a tuxedo. Other people would say you don't even wear a wristwatch with a tuxedo. But this watch, for me, will always be the one that I picked out for Rachel's wedding. And so that's the story of this watch. A few months later, my oldest daughter got married, and her husband-to-be decided that he wanted something more minimalist style. So we went through the whole exercise, and he picked out his watch, and it turns out that it wasn't a Heuer, but it was a very simple, minimalist three-hand watch by the German brand Junghans. So wanting to complement that selection, I picked this one out. This is a brand not that many people are familiar with it. It's called Nomos. But to me, this was just the perfect watch to wear with a tuxedo and as the father of the bride. It's big, it's understated, but it's also a little bit loud all at the same time. And so this is the Emma's wedding watch, the one that I will always associate with, that one of the happiest days of my life. Another example of a watch that came with a story is this one that in my collection is known as the Emma watch. My daughter was a senior in high school and had applied to Penn in Philadelphia. It so happened that I was buying a watch in Philadelphia at the same time. This is an Abercrombie and Fitch Seafarer. So she was going to hear from Penn on the Friday, and this box came on the Thursday. We were also nervous. Was she going to get in? Is she not going to get in? And I said to myself, if this watch looks good, if this has a good vibe, then she's going to get in. And if I don't like it, she's not. So you know what happened next. I opened the box. I love the watch. This is absolutely one of my favorite watches in the collection. And the next day, Emma got into Penn. It so happens that this watch has gone up in value like crazy since 2003. And so I told Emma a few days ago, and I said, that watch I bought is probably selling for over $10,000 now. And she said, sell it, which told me in an instant that this means a lot more to me than it does to her. Most days, nobody notices my watch. It's kind of a fun thing about collecting. I could be wearing a $200 Seiko or a $20,000 Rolex. Most days it stays under my sleeve and I'm the only one who sees it. And I like the fact that it's kind of a private hobby. It's not like driving the loud sports car, the conspicuous consumption. For me, it's something that stays under my sleeve most of the time, and I enjoy the fact that it means something to me, but it's not something that everybody else has to admire or be a part of.